Coming off a crazy week 2 of fantasy football, you're already starting to see that sometimes the person with the most players standing at the end of fantasy football is actually the winner in fantasy football. So based on injuries and some massive performances by some no-name guys, you're going to see some shakeups in the top 30 wide receiver rankings. Starting out with our first tier, these are guys that you know. CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and Nico Collins sneaks into tier 1 this week. Now with CeeDee Lamb, there's really not much that I want to discuss here. Obviously, he hasn't come out with like a massive performance yet against the Baltimore Ravens. I actually like this matchup better than I thought I would like it a couple weeks ago. This Baltimore Ravens defense has been vulnerable. They just let Devontae Adams destroy them last week, and they did the same against Rashee Rice in week 1. So who's to say that CeeDee Lamb is not going to do the exact same thing? I think it's very likely. So with Jamar Chase, this is my shot call. It's like, if you don't do it against the Washington Commanders at home on Monday night, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we're going to have some serious reevaluation to do on Jamar Chase as a fantasy player if he does not hit in this game. Everything is legitimately lined up for him. I mean, this offense came to life finally in week 2 versus the Chiefs. They're playing the best possible matchup for a wide receiver in fantasy football. So if Jamar Chase doesn't do it, he will not see top 2 again for the foreseeable future. And with Nico Collins at number 3, I think that Nico's in a great spot. Nico is the wide receiver 2 right now in fantasy football, only behind Chris Godwin of all people. And Nico Collins is just in a great situation where he is the number 1 by a mile. Like, it's not close. Week 2 should have proved that to you. Nico Collins was the wide receiver 1 in that game against the Chicago Bears, which was a very, very tough secondary, to be honest with you. So Nico Collins with the Texans and CJ Stroud, even though they're taking up a tough Minnesota defense, I still think Nico has top tier level production written all over him for the majority of the season. That's why he's seen tier 1 this week. Now dropping down to our next tier, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Justin Jefferson here at 4 and 5. Now with Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously he left that game a couple times against the Bucs. He ended up being okay. Apparently it was just cramps. Dan Campbell came out and said Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be fine. There's nothing really to worry about with Amon-Ra. So he's playing the Arizona Cardinals this weekend in Arizona. I like the matchup. Obviously, with Arizona, they didn't let any receiving work go on against the Rams last week, but that's also because the Rams lost Cooper Kupp and didn't have anybody else behind him. So I think Amon-Ra St. Brown showed last week he's still that dude for the Detroit Lions. He's going to be fine, apparently, according to Dan Campbell. So against the Cardinals this week, I'm all back in on Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I really never left. Now, with Justin Jefferson, he's questionable as we can sit here today. He left the game versus the 49ers with a quad injury and did not return. Now, he said he's fine, and Kevin O'Connell, the head coach, said he's probably fine. But, I mean, obviously, based on the fact he didn't return, we've got to at least acknowledge the injury happened, right? So against the Houston Texans this week, against Derek Stingley, if he's not 100%, there's definitely a possibility that he doesn't have his best game. Now, I thought the same thing last week, but that didn't happen. He obviously hit on a massive big play against the 49ers. But Justin Jefferson, because of the nature of the player, he's elite, has to be inside of tier 2 still. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Rashee Rice, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Devonta Smith, and Tyreek Hill. So really, this tier of guys right here has a lot of upside, but definitely some uncertainty for me personally with each one of these guys in their own unique way. Like with Rashee Rice at Atlanta, I don't doubt that Rashee Rice is a great player. I also don't doubt his importance in the offense, especially now that Isaiah Pacheco is down for at least the foreseeable future. Reports are 6 to 8 weeks. Rashee Rice is the clear number 1 in this offense. Period. End of story. It worries me that if they do not get Travis Kelce more involved, and if they do not get Xavier Worthy more involved, there's going to be a clear emphasis by defenses. We just need to roll everything over to Rashee Rice. Now, against the Falcons this week, I'm not really concerned about the matchup on Sunday night. In Atlanta, doesn't really concern me that much. That's why he's at the top of this tier. Now, with the 2 Tampa Bay wide receivers, Mike Evans is obviously the guy I still prefer because he still does provide, I think, the biggest boom play upside. And against the Denver defense, I honestly don't know who Pat Surtain's going to follow. I would imagine it's probably Mike Evans, which will probably minimize the ceiling, which is why I have to stop being stubborn. Chris Godwin's legit. he is legit in this new offense this year. So Chris Godwin is the #1 wide receiver in fantasy. This may be a little too low for people, and I can understand why. I'm just more of I haven't been big on Godwin the past several years, but this is me extending my olive branch saying I need to stop being stubborn with him. This guy has a legitimate top 10 play in him in fantasy at this point. And I think against the Broncos, probably not being shadowed by Pat Surtain, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Godwin. But I still like Mike Evans, of course, because Mike Evans, a little bit matchup proof in a lot of respects. Devonta Smith proved really good against the Atlanta Falcons just tonight when I'm filming this on Monday night after the game. Devonta Smith had a good game. He obviously got in the end zone. He was really targeted quite a bit. Like, I'm not worried about Devonta Smith, and it looks like A.J. Brown is going to miss weeks. That's the report that we got before the game actually started against the Eagles and Falcons. Devonta Smith is probably going to be that wide receiver 1 for several weeks while A.J. Brown is out. So at New Orleans this week, the matchup is a little shaky, obviously. New Orleans has been really good defensively. They couldn't stop CeeDee Lamb last week, and I don't think they'll be able to stop Devonta Smith because Devonta Smith really, out of any wide receiver 2 on their own team, I think has the most capability of being the wide receiver 1. That's really how I feel about Devonta Smith. So I do prefer him this week without A.J. Brown over Tyreek Hill, but you can rank this one however, because obviously Tyreek is so high upside. Obviously without Tua, which is in all likelihood going to happen. As far as I sit here tonight filming this video on Monday night, there's no official word on what Tua's timeline is. I think we would all imagine he's probably not going to play at the very least this week 3 game in Seattle this weekend. So I would say that Tyreek Hill is just going to have a lower floor without Tua and probably a lower ceiling as well. Now, I will say he's going to be top 12, and I've gotten a lot of questions on where you should be ranking Tyreek this week. He's still a top 10 guy. The reason is because with Tyreek Hill, he's in a situation where you cannot just overlook the fact that he's an amazing player and is one of the best players we've ever seen play. I mean, that's really what he is. So the fact that he's got a great offensive-minded head coach with Mike McDaniel, I just believe in his ability to find ways to get Tyreek the ball. Because Tyreek can run too. They're going to find Tyreek ways to get involved, which is why he's not dropping past below top 10 in my own personal rankings. And I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 3, so make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, Marvin Harrison Jr., Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams, and DK Metcalf here. Marvin Harrison Jr., welcome back. That's all I can really say. I had him ranked lower last week, obviously, but I called him a buy low last week. So I've always been in on Marvin Harrison Jr., and I didn't expect this level of mastery in his second week, but he came out and he was dominant as I thought he would be at some point. So with Marvin Harrison Jr., he's in top 12 territory, right back where he belongs. Against the Detroit Lions this week, who have not exactly been great stopping wide receivers this year, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is in line to have another really dominant performance. There's probably going to be a lot of games we'll see with Marvin this year, where instead of doing what he did last week, which is get 4 catches for 2 touchdowns and 100+ yards, he'll probably have a lot of games where he has like 8 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown. This might be his first week of doing that, but either way, Marvin Harrison Jr., top 12 option. Garrett Wilson in New England drops a little bit here, but I'm still pretty confident. Like, I called Garrett Wilson a buy low trade target this week. Now, against the New England Patriots, I don't particularly think is a bad matchup. Obviously, they just got crushed by DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith-Njigba. There's always a divisional element to this. It's a divisional game on a short week for both teams on Thursday night. So we'll see how Garrett Wilson can respond to that situation. I obviously still trust Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to be fine because this dude is still involved. He's not a ghost. This guy has still been getting targeted and he's still making plays. So all it really takes is for him to get in the end zone to have a really good week in fantasy. Davante Adams versus Carolina. Listen, Davante Adams has a massive game last week against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I wouldn't probably have Davante this high if he wasn't taking on the Panthers. The Panthers are a broken team. That team is broken. I mean, their culture is just, it's atrocious. And I don't think that the quarterback shift is going to affect this team in a massive way because it's Andy Dalton. Like, it's a bad situation. So obviously I don't love the Las Vegas Raiders offense still, but I do love the Davante Adams production he put up last week, and I do love the matchup against the Panthers. And then with DK Metcalf, also I'm taking my heels out of the mud on this one too. DK Metcalf was an animal last week. He was an animal. Dude had like 16 targets, and he just absolutely ripped apart the New England Patriots defense. Against the Dolphins, again, I think the matchup is very, very similar. The Dolphins defense, I think, is kind of in a similar spot with Carolina. Not nearly as demoralized, but they will be demoralized to a certain extent. It's what we saw last week, and I think it extends into this week as well. So with DK Metcalf, the importance to the offense has been there for both games of the year, and I think that DK Metcalf has another really strong game in Seattle this week against the Miami Dolphins. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Malik Neighbors at number 15 and Brandon Ayuk at number 16. Malik Neighbors obviously has a massive breakout performance this week. It was awesome to watch. Very glad that we were able to watch Malik Neighbors against the Washington Commanders. But that is the problem. And the reality here with Malik Neighbors is that it was Washington. And it's not that Malik Neighbors isn't great. Obviously, we all know Malik Neighbors is a super talent at the wide receiver position. The problem is quarterback. So against the Browns defense in Cleveland this week, I don't see that kind of production from Malik Neighbors again. Now, being the fact that he did break out, and he's obviously got tons of confidence, I would not be surprised if Malik Neighbors has another good game, but I don't see that massive ceiling that he just did with the Commanders last week, which is why I've only got him at 15, but I still feel like this might be even taken as a little bit high. And then with Brandon Ayuk here, this one's out of necessity. I mean, Brandon Ayuk has not looked good, and he's taking on the Los Angeles Rams in Los Angeles, so this one is really two-pronged. So number one, Deebo Samuel is expected to miss the next several weeks with a calf strain. Bad news for 49ers fans, obviously. And I mean, it's tough to trust Brandon Ayuk based on what he's done this year. I mean, you can see the numbers on the screen. Brandon Ayuk has been really slow going, and it's obviously for a reason everybody knows why. I mean, the dude missed a lot of time during the offseason holding out. So Brandon Ayuk is definitely a problem, but based on necessity here, I don't see a way where Brandon Ayuk doesn't receive at least like 8 or 9 targets in this game. Against the Rams, it is a divisional game, but I do like the fact that it's playing the Rams, and the Rams have been really susceptible to wide receiver production this year. Now, with Chris Olave at 17 and Zay Flowers at 18, I told everybody Olave would be fine. I mean, it wasn't like he came out, had a spectacular week 2 performance, but Chris Olave is going to be just fine. I mean, we're in a place right now with Chris Olave. Yes, he's the wide receiver 1 still, based on like importance to the offense, I think. And the matchup is really, really good against the Eagles. The Eagles honestly just got ripped apart by a combination of Drake London and Darnell Mooney. So I think that Olave, based on how well the Saints are rolling right now, could be a really good breakout game for him. But based on the lack of production he's done so far and the big plays going to Rashid Shaheed, he's down here at 17. Zay Flowers at 18 against the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. The reality with the Ravens, Lamar Jackson against NFC teams, his record is like outrageous. It's like he's only lost like 2 games against the NFC his entire career. That's absurd. So like I think that the Ravens win this game, and I also think that Zay Flowers is going to come out a big beneficiary of this, because Zay Flowers obviously he's a number 1 target. So like he's always got a place inside the top 30. It really does range from matchup week to week. And I think based on the fact of what he did last week, obviously he played really well. What he's got this week on docket with the Dallas Cowboys' weaker secondary that was exposed against the New Orleans Saints. And based on the fact that he is their consistent target number 1, Zay Flowers will range, but I think this opportunity here is particularly strong for Zay Flowers in week 3, which is exactly why when I see his line on Underdog this week against the Cowboys at 55.5 receiving yards, I'm actually taking the higher this week on this one. I think this could very easily be like a 70 to 80 yard game for Zay Flowers, because again, he's the wide receiver 1, is going to get tons of targets against a weaker secondary that got exposed versus the New Orleans Saints. So if you're as bullish on this one as I am, go to Underdog using that link in the comments below. And when you use code FFN to sign up for Underdog and deposit at least $10, they'll match your first deposit up to $1,000 of bonus cash, and you'll be able to take advantage of this Zay Flower line. So go down there in the comments, use code FFN to sign up for Underdog today. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Jaden Reed at 19 and DJ Moore at 20. So with Jaden Reed, I'll say it right away, very, very fluid. A very, very fluid spot in my rankings right now. He's in a situation where he could easily be a lot higher than this by the end of the week if we get word that Jordan Love is playing, or he'll probably be around here, which is kind of where I feel comfortable putting him at right now. Now, Jaden Reed definitely has a lower floor than this, but I think based on importance in this offense, Jaden Reed does have always upside in fantasy football because he's extremely efficient with his work. Because it's not just targets, right? Like, obviously, if you just look at receiving, last week was bad. Last week was not a good receiving game. But Jaden Reed also gets carries, and he had like a carry for like 30 yards last week. So Jaden Reed's not going anywhere in this offense. And this is a matchup, I don't think that L'Jarius Sneed, who is the real threat in Tennessee, is going to follow Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed's in motion on every freaking play. So Jaden Reed he's a unique guy, very similar to a Deebo Samuel. So it obviously depends on what Jordan Love comes back or not. I read a report that said Jordan Love was actually really close to playing in week 2. Whether or not that was BS, it remains to be seen. I guess we'll find out heading into week 3. DJ Moore, I'm worried. I am worried about DJ Moore against the Indianapolis Colts. Not because I think the matchup is so tough. Like, the Colts are not like a particularly brutal matchup for a wide receiver for me. It really comes down to the fact that I think DJ Moore and Caleb Williams don't have much chemistry. I mean, I watched that game on Sunday night, and DJ Moore was frustrated. Like, if you guys watched that game, DJ Moore was like borderline throwing his helmet at how frustrated he was with Caleb Williams not getting him the ball on time. And it's not that he wasn't looking at DJ Moore. He was. He was trying to get DJ Moore the ball. The reality is that DJ Moore is just in a situation where he's dealing with a rookie quarterback, and he doesn't look very good right now. So this chemistry thing needs to get ironed out. I think based on importance in this offense, especially if Keenan is out, I think definitely has to be inside the top 20 because he's a great player. Now, Stephon Diggs is at 21 and Calvin Ridley is at 22. So with Stephon Diggs here and Calvin Ridley, I prefer Diggs because he's still getting a lot of targets, and it's similar to what we saw in week 1. I think it's at this point, we can kind of safely say Stephon Diggs is more of a short yardage guy. So a lot of times it will be dependent and kind of reminiscent of like a Keenan Allen at this point of his career, where it's like he's going to get a lot of shorter routes for the quarterback, kind of like bailout plays, and plays where you just have like a 3rd and 2 and need to pick up a first down, or plays at the goal line. So we are sort of dependent on a touchdown, but based on importance in this offense and based on how good CJ Stroud is, I really find it hard to put Stephon Diggs really, really low in the rankings. With Calvin Ridley here against the Packers, I mean, Calvin Ridley was good in week 2. I mean, that touchdown catch was incredible, by the way. That catch, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch the highlights on that catch because, Calvin Ridley was incredible in that game just based on the one catch he had. Now, again, Calvin Ridley is a problem because he's dealing with Will Levis at quarterback. But ultimately, I have said this and I will continue to say it. There is something there with Will Levis. It's talent. It's definitely talent. But it's not consistently being shown to us. So against the Packers this week, who did much better last week than I thought they would, I think that Calvin Ridley could be in for a tougher game, and it's just a lower floor with Will Levis, unfortunately. Now, dropping down to our next tier, here's where things start to get interesting. I've got Jameson Williams, Rashid Shaheed, George Pickens, and Michael Pittman Jr. So this tier right here is a combination of big plays and consistent volume. Jameson Williams, ironically, has seen the best of both worlds. I really didn't. I can't tell you enough. This is why I love the fantasy season, because crazy things happen all the time. I never saw a world like where I would put Jameson Williams inside of my top 30 rankings. He's been in the league for 3 years now, and he's never sniffed that amount for me. Jameson Williams, 2 straight weeks, basically 10 targets he's averaging. This dude has been really freaking good for the Detroit Lions. And against the Cardinals this week, I like the matchup again. So Jameson Williams, I want to put him if I had a mind to, I would put him higher in the rankings for sure. I just can't shake the feeling that I've seen over the past several years. But again, Jameson Williams could easily find himself higher on this list a week from now. Rashid Shaheed, it's similar but different. Like, Rashid Shaheed is not seeing the target share that Jameson Williams is seeing. He's not as important to this offense. He's important to the offense because obviously he provides a massive big play upside, but he's not there yet. He's not at that point with Jameson Williams where I'm as comfortable ranking him over Jameson Williams. But based on what we've seen, Rashid Shaheed has hit with Derek Carr because Derek Carr does throw a good deep ball. So in this Clint Kubiak system, Rashid Shaheed is like the perfect fit. And against the Eagles this week, the matchup doesn't scare me. George Pickens against the Chargers, matchup doesn't particularly scare me. And I think that Pickens, what we've seen, and last week, like a big play got wiped away from George Pickens. He would have had a better fantasy output if a penalty didn't wipe it away. Pickens is obviously the wide receiver 1. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So against a stronger matchup without Pat Surtain on him, who he kind of beat up, by the way, I think Pickens is solid inside the top 25. And then Pittman Jr., the only thing keeping him inside of here is the targets. I mean, that's where we're at with Michael Pittman Jr. I'm worried. I'm definitely worried for Michael Pittman Jr. I'm really worried about this one. So I'm not confident, but I still am keeping him inside the top 26 because he has the target share. Against the Bears, not a strong matchup to get right, so I'm worried, but the target share keeps him inside the top 30. Now, dropping down to our last tier right here. Drake London, Keenan Allen, Tank Dell, and Jalen Waddle round out the top 30. Now, with Drake London versus the Chiefs, I think that the matchup is not particularly strong. And listen, Drake London did end up having a good week in week 2. I think that's great for him. He was targeted a lot more, and he ended up getting the game-winning touchdown. That's fantastic for Drake London. There was a lot of points in that game where Drake London was really pissing people off again to the point where they were like, there's no way I'm about to get a bad performance again, right? He was really close to that. He ended up having kind of a game-saving touchdown, but ultimately was still involved to the point where I'm still comfortable having him inside the top 30. Now, Drake London, I'm still not a huge believer in. I'm not a huge believer in this offense, so it's going to take some more convincing for me to rank him higher, but you can still definitely play Drake London this week. Keenan Allen, obviously, is still questionable, but the only reason, this one might sound weird, the only reason Keenan Allen's in here, when I watched that game against the Texans, I thought to myself, Caleb Williams could really use Keenan Allen right now. Keenan Allen is like the quarterback's best friend. Like, he is so good at getting open on shorter routes, bailing out his quarterback on easier throws to play. So I think that Keenan Allen, there's a reason why he led the team in targets in week 1. So obviously we're going to have to see if he plays. Against the Colts, I think the matchup is strong. So Keenan Allen here, I don't think has a ton of upside based on the injury and based on the fact that he's not a big play guy at this point with all those other weapons, but I think he opens up the offense. So just based on importance here, I think Keenan Allen, if he plays, is inside the top 30 this week. Tank Dell at 29, disappointing so far for sure. I mean, Stephon Diggs has kind of pushed him out of that wide receiver 2 role, and Tank Dell was awful in fantasy last week. There's legitimate concern here, but I find it hard pressed to put Tank Dell outside my top 30 because of the offense he's on. In the matchup against Minnesota, there could be really strong matchups for Tank Dell in the slot. Like, I just think that it's with this offense with CJ Stroud, it's hard for me to rank Tank Dell outside the top 30, which is why I'm not going to do it just yet. But if he has another bad week, we'll be looking at that possibility. Jalen Waddle at 30 at Seattle, this is where he lands for me. A lot of people have asked me where Jalen Waddle lands without Tua as well. I'm way more worried about Jalen Waddle than I am with Tyreek. Tyreek, we know he's the number 1. We know Jalen Waddle's a really good number 2, but the reality is if you don't have a good quarterback, a lot of times your number 2 is not relevant in fantasy. Waddle's going to be really dependent on big plays. Can he do it? Of course he can. Is it 100%? Absolutely not. I'm worried about Jalen Waddle against the Seahawks. A pretty strong defensive play this week, and I do think that Jalen Waddle is in a position where he's not going to get the volume to be fantasy relevant unless he hits a big play. And as I do at the end of every single rankings video, I go through and I give you my favorite underdog pick of the week at the wide receiver position. This is exclusively tailored for people who want to play in underdog best ball drafts that Underdog does weekly for good payouts. And this week, I've got to go with my boy Jackson Smith-Njigba. Finally has a big game in the NFL, and I'm so happy for him. I wanted to put him inside my top 30. I can't trust him yet, but I do like the potential prospect of him having another good game against the Miami Dolphins. Weaker defense right here has been susceptible, and Jackson with the Jigba, all he needs to do is keep up that target share, and he's going to continue to be really good in this offense. Almost had 20 targets in week 2. Probably won't get that many this week, but if he gets 10 or 12, Jackson with the Jigba has a legit chance to get in the end zone this week. That's my underdog wide receiver of the week. So let me know how your team is looking through the first 2 weeks of fantasy, and if you want to see the best buy low trade targets this week, click on this video right here.